Hello, and welcome to the Watson Institute for International Public Affairs, Mark and Carrie, April edition. Here we are, Blyth.
So, let me get this straight. We have to mention the Watson Institute first now. Is that policy?
Yeah, I mean, they're the backers here. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Can we actually turn them into our sponsors?
Maybe we get a free mattress or some, healthy green drink out of it or something.
How about My Pillow?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We'll get Mike on to do it. Come on, it's the Mark and Carrie show. Yes. Speaking of Mike Lindell and other people who really like President Trump, he's been in the news again, hasn't he, Carrie?
Well, you're just diving right into it. I feel like I need to take a deep breath here, only because you just want to leave Trump behind. I feel like he's been in office, running for office since my entire lifetime. So just that he's back on, front page, all caps headlines makes it even more exhausting. But right. So he's indicted on 34 counts, all having to do with the hush money. And the legal stuff, I think, is out there. And that's not my particular expertise. The politics of it, of course, are what's particularly fascinating to me, and the way that all of the Trump people have lined up behind him, and what this says about the Republican primary, and I could go on and on and on. But that was my.
Well, please do. That's why we're here. I mean, for you to go on and on about this because you know this stuff. Let's start off with I know you don't want to get into the legal stuff, right? But the politics of it are pretty straightforward, right? We didn't get Al Capone for being a gangster. We got him on taxes. Yeah. And this really smells similar. Now, of course, the defense for doing this is, well, if he stopped committing crimes, we wouldn't have things to go after him on. So apart from this is also the Georgia lawsuit, which is actually more serious, at least in my opinion, that sort of stuff. But it definitely smacks of, we're just going after this guy so he can't run for president because we are terrified as a class that he might win again. I mean, is that so off base? Well,
to your exact point is this is not the strongest of the cases, that the leading with the one that's the most salacious, right? Hush money, right? I mean, all of that versus the more serious ones supposedly coming at him, Georgia included. So what's again interesting to me is to see where this puts the Republican primary, because I think that let's just say this is the only case, and it's unclear whether or not he'll actually be sent to jail, which he probably won't. And sad for Trump too. No perp walk, supposedly, according to Maggie Haberman, he'd been practicing that. No mugshot, no handcuffs. Sad times for him. He'd been practicing all of that stuff. But where exactly does that put the Republican primary? And of course, DeSantis is the one that you're looking most at. And again, he shows that he's just not willing to engage with Trump on the pugilistic politics of it, meaning that Trump just hits him again and again and again in the face. He's trying, he workshops all these new nicknames for him, like right, DeSanctimonious, Little D, Meatball. We've talked about all of these before. And in fact, Trump's numbers have risen according to the polls, right? He's gained 4 points, depending on which one you look at. He's raised, according to his people, $7 million since the indictment. And DeSantis' name is just off the front page. And so to read not so secret tea leaves on this is that Trump is in a really strong place to win the nomination of the party and just leave DeSantis and the rest of the people that we can't name right now in the dust.
It does seem that DeSantis' only sort of comeback to this is to repeatedly say, look, porn stars, hookers, hush money, infidelity. I can't talk about that, but what I can say, and then 5 minutes later to say, hush money, porn stars, infidelity. I can't say anything about that. But so he just keeps basically saying, this is who Trump is, this is who Trump is. And as you say, it's clearly not working, because if you're DeSantis, what you've done is to basically go all in on culture wars and culture war material, right? And you're going all in against sort of woke capitalism and all this sort of stuff. And when you do that, what you're doing is being a very high stakes game that, number one, that outside of your base, people actually give a crap about this stuff.
Yep.
That they actually think it's a motivating thing. They really care about the politics of transgender. And also the way that it's coming out is they just look mean. They just look like they're picking on vulnerable kids and calling anyone who has any sympathy for anyone involved in the trans movement as a groomer, which is so weird and creepy and just awful. So there's a sort of a bad, mean politics to it. And then on the other side of it, you've got Trump, and Trump is basically just saying, look, I told you they'd come and get me. They're afraid of me. And look,
Yeah.
this is what they're doing. And they're just putting this together and it's all bullshit, right? And, little wonder amongst the base that sort of DeSantis says, no, we must really just be mean to every vulnerable person. That's just kind of decaying versus like getting behind the People's Tribune, which is the role that Trump plays the best.
Well, and the DeSantis is, you're just like, what? Because he's saying exactly what you said, and I just fell asleep because I don't really even understand it. Versus Trump, they're coming after you, and they're getting to you through me. So, they're going to throw me in jail, and you're next. And I understand that pretty easily. And DeSantis is garbled, like mealy mouth, blah, blah. You're just like, I don't really know what you're saying. And the base doesn't trust or like DeSantis. They trust and like Trump, ironically, but they don't like DeSantis. And I think part of that is because DeSantis isn't actually, Trump is genuine in who he is.
This is it. He's the self-made guy, even if his dad made the money, from Queens, right? He's the outsider. DeSantis, for all of his I'm so against all this woke stuff, he went to 2 Ivy League institutions.
Yeah.
And yet he managed to survive it without too much trauma. I mean, who's kidding whom on this one?
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I think this puts Trump in a very strong position. Now, let's play the other side of this, right? Which is, well, what's a prosecutor supposed to do? They're independent. They operate at the level of the state. It turns out that in Georgia, they're kind of concerned that the guy was basically saying, can we please overturn an election? In D.C., they're looking into, or at least they were at one point, the fact that he was basically involved in a riotous assembly against the United States government that led to the deaths of several people. And then there's loads of stuff in New York. Now, if you really were doing the politics of this, what you would do is you would pull back on the Manhattan one and firm up the case on the other ones and really go after him for that.
Yeah.
So in a way, the fact that they're doing this and going after him with this weak stuff attests to the independence of the judiciary, which also suggests that, no, they're not out to get him. He's just done a whole bunch of bad stuff, which ultimately catches up with you.
Yeah. Imagine that. He's actually maybe guilty of this.
I've got a fridge magnet that says, well, look at that if it isn't the consequences of my own actions.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. And I think that if you think about the swing voters, which there are 3 of them in America, and they reside in the suburbs, this kind of thing is just 34 counts. I don't really understand. Felony seems bad. 34 seems like a lot. Do I really want to go through 4 more years of this? And then on the other side, on the big D Democratic side of things, you kind of got to think, right? Democrats are like, we don't want Trump, or we want Trump because he's potentially the only person that Biden could beat. And then you think, that's all you got, Democrats, is that to be anti-Trump? I mean, where are the other policy things that Biden is going to run on? And
is Biden actually going to run? But we'll get to that one another time. What else has been going on then? Well,
I mean, there seems to be a few things going on around the globe. I thought the picture of Putin and Xi clearly very comfortable with each other in Moscow. And then Xi's invitation, come on down for another romantic date in Beijing, seemed to be really very friendly. And I just thought that was such an interesting picture to have up alongside of the grilling that the Tik Tok, is he CEO? Yeah, CEO had in front of Congress, which basically shows Congress has no idea how the internet,
tech or anything works. It's like anything. Facebook all over again, right?
Yes.
Okay, let's separate these out. There's the whole issue with TikTok. Let's put that to one side, right?
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting with the Putin and China stuff, and then of course you've got sort of competitive bidding as to which Congress person can meet with the president of Taiwan.
Yeah.
Just now, right? So there's the whole Taiwan thing and Pelosi, but now McCarthy's got to be there and all this sort of stuff, right? What does all this add up to? The thing that got drowned out in all of this was the Russian peace plan for Ukraine. So it wasn't just they met. They came up and said, this is how we're going to fix it. And immediately the Ukrainians were like, no, you're not. And the Americans said, no, you're not. Well, China's been pretty active. China, just last month, brokered a rapprochement between the Saudis and the Iranians.
Yes. Yeah.
They're also on pretty good terms with other people in the region. The Abraham Accords the Americans set up are bringing the Gulf states and Israel closer together. But at the same time, the real axis that you need to worry about, if you are worried about the Middle East at all, is what's going on with Saudi and Iran. If they basically become, if not friends, then at least as a modus vivendi, that really curtails American power, right, and influence in the region. China gets closer there. They're emerging as kind of the credible independent broker. They're saying basically, you may not like this peace plan. How about this peace plan? We're at least offering one. What are the Americans offering? More weapons and more death, right?
Yeah.
So they're really putting themselves into an interesting position. Now, in terms of the sort of the relationship between the two, it's quite clear that Russia needs China far more than China needs Russia. And to a certain extent, the sort of like come on down for the second romantic date isn't really a kind of, and then we'll really get into bed together. It is sort of more of an anti-American coalition than it is a love fest between the two of them. And if the Saudis begin to realize that they don't need an American security guarantee and they're quite fine playing a sort of an independent role, and you've got Turkey doing the same thing on the neo-southern flank, and you've got the Germans sending tanks, but at the same time, 30% of Germans want an end to the war now, it begins to look like, once again, okay, America, what's your plan? What's your end game? How are you going to sort this out? Because at least the Chinese seem to have some impetus and desire to end this rather than just inflame it.
I had forgotten about Saudi Arabia and Iran meeting. I mean, if that isn't a telltale sign that the U.S. has gotten outmaneuvered, to have these two countries meeting, it's kind of like, right, alongside. Yeah. And that the U.S. didn't really seem to have any response to that either. Right. Kind of like a shrug of the shoulders. Well, I'm sure much more than that, but at least to the external observer, there didn't seem to be very much a response. I thought that was all really interesting. On Taiwan and China, just to put them together for a second. And I know this point has been made over and over, but it's really the only bipartisan issue that the U.S. Congress has that you could have AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene actually agree on. And maybe they don't agree, but to have the two left and right sides actually agree on it. Yeah.
So let's pivot from there to the great example of that, which is everyone over the age of 60 in Congress hates TikTok and have no idea what it is.
Correct.
So did you actually watch any of the grilling that guy got?
I watched a tiny bit of it, but I have to say, it was so, to continue on this line of thinking, there were parts of it that I just thought were so xenophobic and just, and we're just like, you're Singaporean, but do you understand Chinese law? Just like weird stuff to the CEO. And I just found it to be like, really, these are our leaders of the country. And it just,
nobody ever turns around and says, Apple, it's an American company.
Thank you. Yeah.
Who knows what's deep inside the source code? Maybe every time you're making a phone call or looking at a video, they're recording that and it's going to Langley in the NSA. Why is it only a one-way street on this thing? And given the fact that TikTok is basically used by teens to do sort of funny videos, that's literally what most of it does.
Yeah.
The notion, this is a security threat. How? Well, because it's so networked, it could be pulling data. Pulling data on what? Who can hop the fastest on one leg? It's okay, maybe there's more serious implications to this, but as you say, this is another coalition of convenience, right? The one thing we can agree upon is we need an external enemy, and the external enemy is Russia and China, which, of course, immediately that makes the enemy of my enemy my friend. And it's precisely those dynamics that push Russia and China together. So it's kind of like, you wonder why the world's ganging up on you. It's because you keep punching the rest of the world in the face.
Well, and doesn't Jeff Bezos / Amazon / fill in the blank American tech company, doesn't China already know my data if they even want it? Because I bought something from Amazon, and the thing that they sold me is made or sold by a Chinese company.
Well, not just that. We've got all these records now of Amazon Alexa basically listening into conversations. But interestingly, particularly of ethnic minorities in the United States, and trying to basically improve its recognition by lurking in the background and doing all this sort of stuff. Now, we have no evidence that TikTok does anything like that. But we completely give all the American tech firms a pass for all the egregious violations that they do in terms of both privacy and, in the case of Instagram, actual harm, mental health harm, and in the case of Facebook, weaponizing anger as its main business model.
Yes.
Really, can we get a sense of perspective on TikTok here?
Yeah. Well, and through YouTube as well, the politics of it. Angry. That I can go from, teaching myself how to knit to learning how to buy a shotgun in 2 videos.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, yes, that's kind of sad. What can you say? What else? Where else are we going to go? Let's get out of the US.
We'll move on to something happy, and that's called the strikes in France.
Yay.
I feel like the French are really good at protesting. I feel like they're just, they commit to it, and they're not in it for the short haul. They're in it for like mountains of trash, and we're not going to give this thing up. I thought it was interesting in that, there's so much talk about authoritarians around the world and all of that stuff, that Macron passes this through an executive order.
Totally.
Right? And then they survive all these no confidence votes. And so that's what I thought was really interesting, is him passing this through a strongman type of way.
Well, you think about it, he has this movement rather than a party, which is a bunch of disaffected people from other parties that failed. It's really about him. There's a whole thing. I don't know if you saw the whole thing with him and the luxury watch.
Yes.
The watch is banging on the table because it's like some pathetic Philippe or something like this that weighs 4 tons. So he took it off, and of course people are like, oh, he's trying to hide his wealth. And it's like, no, it was actually just banging on the desk. But it is the type of watch that you only have if you're absurdly well off, right? It's as simple as that. So, the signal is there. But there was a really nice piece, I think it was a Twitter thread actually from Thomas Piketty, who really put this whole thing into context in a lovely way. He said, look, you've underinvested in education, you've underinvested in skills, you've underinvested in infrastructure, you've underinvested in the future. All you really care about is some faux measure of budget balance. Inequality is rising all the time. And your solution to this now is to make people work longer. Yeah. Rather than actually thinking about why is it that you're in this state, that this is even a plausible answer to the question as to why we're in the state. It's because people need to work longer. No, that's not it. It's everything else that's basically built up that you haven't addressed. Why not do something about that? The other great way, and I think we spoke about this before, Simon Cooper had a fantastic essay in the Financial Times talking about this, which is essentially the French have got it right and everybody else has got it wrong. The French talk about the 60s as the last good decade. Right. And it's basically, it is, right? This is it. You've got that 10 years left, right? It's pretty good, whatever. Yeah. And we want to extract all of the value out of that so that you basically wait until you're 68 in the United States, or even longer. You're a Walmart greeter when you're like 79, right? Geez. Just work till you drop, right? Just keep going. And, the French are saying basically, look, we can afford this. We could change taxes. We could do other things to make this thing solvent. It's the same as the American Social Security thing, right? The current cap is something like 167, and we have a Social Security crisis because we can't fund it. There's too many old people. Bullshit. Just lift it to 1 million so that everybody pays Social Security taxes on income to 1 million. Oh, but only rich people would pay that. Yes, exactly. And there would be no more solvency problems. So the French are basically saying, look, 80% of us would benefit from retiring when we're still at the good side of our last good decade. It would be good for us, it would be good for our families, it would be good for the country. But no, rather than allow that to happen by raising taxes on you so you can have your ridiculous watch, right? We're going to basically have to work 2 extra years. Nope, get the barricades out. So yeah, absolutely. I think there's much more here than meets the eye.
This is why are we so afraid of taxing the quote unquote rich? We're just terrified of it. That to raise it on the Social Security, to actually make it so that I might get some, like a tenth of what, I've put into it, it doesn't seem like it's that crazy of a notion.
Well, just think about it from this way, right? So you go from basically, let's say $200,000 a year, right? You're already above it. So you're not paying Social Security on $40,000. Let's go to people who then earn $1 million, right? What that means is they're paying an extra $800,000 becomes taxable at 8%, right? So that's taking a big chunk of change. The only people who are in those upper brackets are going to pay. Now, it's a big revenue raiser, but it's actually targeted on very few people who happen to be the people who donate to politics, who are the people who are the most influential members of society. So you can see how it immediately runs into problems. Do you remember what's it called again, the 537 program that allows for higher education? It's a saving program. Yeah. Remember when Obama tried to basically go against that to raise money for community college, and he had the biggest backlash from his donor class ever?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, it's great. That's it. The one thing we can't do is go anywhere near the wealth or assets of the upper middle classes. That's just verboten. You can't do it.
Well, and I was thinking a lot about this. This now seems like super old news, but it was last month was the failure of Silicon Valley Bank. And you read like the non-social media TikTok, but the TikTok of how that happened. And you have people who were like, we have to turn back the regulation 2018, including the president of that bank, right? And then flash forward to now on the horn with Joe Biden or the Biden administration asking for a bailout. And so, I mean, the cynical side of me was like, oh, I'm really curious. Why is it? Because I think a few days after then there was the shooting in Nashville, and you think, oh, how is it that the banks get bailed out to the tune of however billions of dollars? And so in terms of finance policy, we can move the dial. But in terms of gun background checks, what have you, when it comes to gun policy, we can't do anything. So I just quickly looked, and this is, again, a short and cynical way of thinking about things. But the finance industry gives to both sides of the aisle because they're smart. They gave in 2020 $220 million to Democrats and $219 million to Republicans. So, I mean, I guess that's why it is that they
understand finance, right? They don't know who's going to be in. You give to both.
Yep. And they get a solution over a weekend. Yeah.
So what's the story basically then with the gun lobby? Why can't you do anything on that? What's the equivalence there or the lack thereof to the finance people?
Yeah, and I think that's the incentives, right? I mean, they only give to one side they only give to the Republicans one, and there isn't any, and there's no part of the policy that either side can agree on. And so I guess, if you want to have some sort of gun control policy or gun policy in this country, you have to have a group that's willing to give to both sides and create an incentive structure by which they both agree.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can spread your bet, which is the finance industry strategy, or you can concentrate your bet and make sure that those people can always block. And that's effectively the two strategies that you've got in politics. Yeah, absolutely. Outlined right there. Can we talk about Scotland?
Yes, we can talk about Scotland. Sorry to be an American here. I saw that there's a change in leadership, but I know this has much broader implications, but then I didn't get further into my news feed about this.
Yes. So basically what happened was, in the manner of, it seemed to be in the manner of, what's her name? The New Zealand ex-Prime Minister.
Jacinda Ardern.
Jacinda Ardern, right. You know what? I'm knackered. I've had enough of this. I don't want to do this anymore. Get out of here, right? And she did, right? And it seemed to be that Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish First Minister, was like, yeah, I've kind of done enough of this. But that didn't smell right. Because first of all, they got themselves wrapped up in the whole sort of culture wars over trans politics. Now, a lot of this goes down to the fact that Scotland has a majority age of consent for a lot of things of 16.
Okay.
Yeah, but you didn't know that, right?
No.
So, for example, when I was growing up, I couldn't have a drink till I was 18, which was bullshit. Everyone was in the pubs at 15, right? But I could legally have sex when I was 16.
Okay. Totally logical.
There you go, right? So that means weird things like, you are a legal person to a certain extent when you're 16 rather than 18 in such certain circumstances. So what this has led to is sort of like, teens essentially declaring themselves to be estranged from their parents and declaring their own gender identity, and the state kind of like taking their side legally because that's just the way the law works. So they tried to clear all this up with a bill that basically gave a lot of rights towards sort of, trans identification amongst teens, and it really split public opinion. So there was a whole sort of like, revanche, if you will, of sort of like, really? And then the whole sort of, another sort of cynical reading of it was, well, perhaps not cynical, was they were getting nowhere on independence, right? I mean, the numbers were basically like 48%, 50%, 47%. It just wasn't going anywhere, and they need to get 60. If Brexit was a bad idea at 52, you're going to have to get like real numbers to do this. And it wasn't going anywhere, and people were getting tired of it, whatever, and then this whole trans thing starts to blow up. So the party was looking kind of like bad. So there was like, you're just bailing because it's not working just now. Then there were rumours that the then chairman of the party, who I'm not mistaken is Nicola's husband, had been giving the party short-term loans because they'd been losing members. And the accounts were a bit opaque, shall we say. I switch on the news today, and there's pictures of policemen on Nicola's lawn outside the house and, outside the SNP headquarters, all this sort of stuff. And it's just another one of these things which, it's a kind of truism, but it's also a kind of as good as you get for a social scientific law, that although it's a democracy, Scotland became a one-party state, right? The SNP was basically like it, right? And it set the agenda. But at the same time, it doesn't really have real fiscal independence. It doesn't have real sovereignty. So in a sense, it's got airbags. There's only so much damage it can cause. And that creates a kind of, if you will, carelessness right? You don't really have to bear the costs of your misadventures, right? Because ultimately you're still embedded within the United Kingdom. So it created a politics of performance and performativity rather than substance. And I think that sort of, that's how this has started to come apart. Now, of course, I'm not there. I'm following this from afar. I could be completely wrong. But, the minute I saw the policeman outside the house, I thought, oh, this is not going well.
Well, this is so interesting because a couple podcasts ago, I had a whole thing about the Prime Minister of New Zealand and Scotland stepping down. They're, young women, and they have other stuff to do. They're tired because the whole thing was politics is so hard and the environment sucks and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, Joe Biden, who's 1,000 years old, is like, I'm going to run for a 5th term. And you have all of the average age of Congress people are 1,000. And so it was this is clearly a gender divide in terms of people. Men are like, I can stay on until I'm actually dead. And women are like, I want to leave. But this is not I'm glad I didn't go off on that.
Yeah,
because it's not
I mean, that's part of the story, right? But it's not all the story, right?
Yeah.
There can be good old fashioned sort of bad politics going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to have to bring it to a bit of a halt soon because I actually have to run off and pick up my daughter. But anyway, because she's too lazy to walk because she's part of that generation. I mean, really, I was walking to school when I was 6. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But anyway, actually, the thing is, if I let her walk home, when I used to walk home to school all the time, right, there was also the chance that I went to the local Catholic school, and I actually had to kind of run the gauntlet of the Protestant kids from the school up the road. And if I got caught, they would kick the living crap out of me on the way home. And that was just the cost of doing business. I mean, I must have been beaten up about 10 times over 7 years, right? And, to think that sort of, my grandmother was totally okay with that, right? It was just, that's just what happened, right? Now, if I let my daughter go to school on her own at the age that I walk to school, she would be picked up, placed in social services, and I would be arrested.
Yes, that's right.
It's just, it's a totally different world. But anyway, let's end on a really interesting note, which of course is Gwyneth. Stop laughing. Stop laughing. It's very serious. Gwyneth Paltrow's trial.
Justice has had its day, Blyth. Your point about an independent judicial system here, this is the shining example of that. I mean, I think that the trial, but who ran into who on the really fancy ski slope.
I love the drawings. I love the drawings of
Yes.
And at one point she was like, "Am I being groped from behind?" I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. I love that at the end when she supposedly whispered "be well" to him, that on Twitter people are like, that's LA speak for screw you. So I guess I just found the fashion coverage, the all of it was just picked apart and analyzed.
There was a big piece. I think it was either the Atlantic or Vanity Fair had this whole thing on it, whatever, right? No, to me, what's really interesting is Gwyneth herself, right?
Yeah.
So she's gone from being, an actor, right? Whether it's the unexpected Oscar for Shakespeare in Love, whether it's the Iron Man's girlfriend, right? All this sort of stuff. I mean, I don't think she even acts anymore. Then there's the whole sort of I'm actually British and I live in London and I sometimes have a British accent. Then there's Goop, right? And the whole sort of why don't you buy this candle that you put inside your body and all this sort of wonderfully weird stuff.
Yep.
So, and then there's all the people that really hate her, right? And it's funny how she's become this kind of fantasy object. She's this kind of postmodern figure whereby on the one hand, she sort of represents the aspirations of extremely privileged upper middle class people and their sort of heightened sense of entitled consumption and being in the world.
Yep,
and then on the other hand, she represents a kind of an entirely different thing, which is sort of everything that's wrong with that class, right?
Yes.
And she's both. She's simultaneous, but she's in a sense, there's no sense of who she is. And what I thought was fascinating about the trial, there was still no sense of who she is, right? Gwyneth was there, but she wasn't there, right? She was being constructed through the commentary about her.
Yes. And yes, exactly. And so her answers, therefore, were analyzed to put exactly those two different
versions of her, right? Which one is she today? Or, how does it back up one versus the other? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, that kept me going for a few days, just the total, I didn't know whether it's a mockery of, to your point, whether people were, I think they were doing both and more, mocking her while also kind of like, putting her on a pedestal and all of that stuff.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's crazy though. I mean, you start the conversation with a conversation about America's most divisive ever president being brought into jail on charges that a lot of people can't frankly understand. And then you end it with one of America's most divisive celebrities being in a civil trial about who banged into whom in an elite ski resort.
Yes.
Very odd world.
And both of them are trying to sell us stuff, by the way, too, whether it's candles or green juice or, like a sweatshirt or, to help him with his indictments. So,
hey, those lifestyles, although they're very different, both need to be financed.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Send your donations here to the Carrie Fund.
Please.
Because Carrie needs your help.
We need it. Yes. Well, great to see you as always. Thank you for listening.
See you all soon.
Bye.